2 dedicated lanes each. Is this a closed meeting?
Where you got that information?
What?
Or something like that.
What I prefer, but just on that comment, we have to look at the corridor. And again, I'm just pressing, and I hope I have my fellow mayor's support here, that this project just has to have that before I think a decision can be made as to what is the best situation or the best solution for the future of this region at this crossing. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and I think from Translink's perspective, that the whole transit corridor for there, I think people don't realize actually the amount of transit users that use the current tunnel is actually quite a significant portion of the users there. But I think for whatever project lands there, for it to be successful to ultimately hook up into a very urban road network in Richmond and Vancouver, has to have a very successful and well thought out public transit corridor involved with that. So I know Metro Vancouver has a task force that will be having an open and public meeting at the beginning of October on this issue, which I think some more updates will be coming forward at that particular point in time. So, Mayor Walker.
Thank you, and I support Mayor Harvey's comments, and so I might have done the same thing, but you jumped in first. Thank you very much. But I will say that it wasn't in closed meetings with both the Mayor of Richmond and the Mayor of Surrey indicated very, very strongly the importance of rapid transit on the entire system. That was something that the Mayor of Surrey brought forward at a number of our meetings, and certainly Mayor Brody has talked about the fact that we're just moving the problem a little bit farther down the road. Whatever the answer is, it has to be beyond perhaps what is being talked about now, and so I support you fully on that.
Okay, so I'll look for a motion to receive this report for information. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And our final item on the agenda is a report from Translink Management.
Morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Mayor's Council. So I have a few things to go over to add to today's conversation. First, ridership. I was going to do this at the July meeting to give a half-year report, but I'm here to give you a report through August of this year. So ridership continues to grow. We've all been talking about it. It's still a healthy growth rate at about 4% year-to-date through August, with about 1.4 million average daily boardings in our system. So if this trend continues actually through the end of the year, then over this sort of 4-year period, 2016 through 2019, we'll have seen about a 20% growth in overall ridership in our system over that period of time. Pretty astonishing work, but we're clearly fueling a lot of that with the service increases that you've been able to turn on through the Mayor's plan. Just a couple notable things that I want to point out with the numbers up there. First is HandyDart. When we started putting more service out as part of the Phase 1 plan, the response from the HandyDart riders was kind of slow to pick up. We didn't quite see the ridership growth that the service hours would have otherwise enabled. We are seeing it. Excuse me. We are seeing it now, and in fact, year to date, so far this year, we're averaging about 1,000 more trips per month than planned. So we may now be seeing that point of the slope of the ridership growth beginning to press our ability to support it with the planned and funded service increases. We're examining that. We're trying to figure out the right balance between HandyDart vehicles and taxi cabs. And in fact, as part of the overflow need to deal with that additional demand, we've been increasingly turning to taxis to meet some of that demand. I think taxis are about 12% of all trips. That said, I believe in Canada we still have actually the largest portion of our paratransit service provided by vans as opposed to taxis. We will be adding additional service to HandyDart, funded in the plan next month, a 2% growth, and again in January. And hiring is underway with our contractor to support that. But we're glad to see that increase in ridership, and we're going to have to look very, very closely to see what and how we address that as part of the Phase 3 plan as well, to try to make sure that we've got the sufficient funding to meet the demand. Kind of another interesting trend that we don't have up there, even with the 4% increase in ridership, average daily ridership, we're seeing a disproportionate increase in ridership on weekends, kind of across the board. So year to date, weekend ridership is up 5.3%. On Handy Dart, weekend ridership is up 15%. So I don't know exactly what explains that, other than increasingly people are choosing public transit to do their weekend activities. So we like to see that. That's a very good trend to have. Back to electric buses. We agree with the statements. We want to get into this and begin to get into it. I wish Jeff was right. Jeff is almost always right that we have the largest electric fleet in North America. San Francisco has a slightly larger trolley fleet than we do. That was a factoid I was going to use as well, but I was also corrected. But that said, yeah, we're very proud that we've got a long tradition at the Coast Mountain Bus Company in providing electric service. And last week, with the help of Mayor Kennedy Stewart, we finally launched our foot in the door with our electric bus pilot. So 4 buses, 2 are in operation today. The other 2 will begin operation in a week or so on the Route 100 between the 22nd Street station here in New Westminster and the Marpole Transit Center in the city of Vancouver. You can see the stats there. These electric buses save up to 100 tons of GHG emissions compared to a diesel bus. They are smoother and quieter. So we'll be looking forward to the customer experience on these buses. They are, of course, highly energy efficient. Each bus during the 2.5-year pilot is expected to save about $40,000 in fuel costs versus a diesel bus. The buses, as you can see depicted at the top of the bus, is the catenary that goes up into the charging station. They are spec'd to recharge at each terminal at about 5 minutes to keep juicing up the battery a little bit. What's notable about our pilot and what makes our project different than other electric bus projects in the world, as a matter of fact, is that it's the first completely interoperable test. And I triple-checked that when I was told by QTRIC, which is the Canadian consortium that's been helping us with this project, that it was the first in the world. I actually didn't believe that, but it is. What does interoperable mean? We have 2 different bus manufacturers, Nova and New Flyer, both Canadian companies, and 2 different charging systems from companies ABB and Siemens. The prize in this space, it gets to a little bit of the answers to the questions that Jeff gave you, Mayor, is we've got to find an standard interoperable set of technologies so that when we all of our colleagues in this industry are going out to the marketplace to procure the buses and the charging facilities, we will have choices. We will not have to get into bed, if you will, with a sole source proprietary technology. So this pilot project for Translink is actually testing that going forward. We already have approval from Metro Vancouver for another 6 electric buses. We will be starting that procurement process fairly soon. So hopefully, maybe by the end of the next year, we'll have another 6 buses on the route. And we would like to get this route fully electrified, which I think requires another total of 9 buses. As Jeff pointed out, we have this inflection point at the beginning of the next decade. Next decade, we'll be buying something like we have to replace something like 600 buses, let alone the expansion fleet. We would prefer those buses be electric and not hybrid or CNG. So as Jeff pointed out, we have a lot of work to do with all of our funding partners and with you to figure out how to fund it. The key issue is the charging infrastructure. Each one of those charging stations is over $100,000. So you can imagine whether we're putting more fast charge stations out in the system or to retrofit existing bases with overnight charging infrastructure. It is rather expensive. We are designing our new bus base in the Silver Tree property on the Fraser River in the city of Vancouver to be fully electric, so that if we've got the funding capability to start introducing electric buses to that base in the early part of next decade, we're hopefully that they will be 100% electric. But as Jeff said, more to come with that. We'll be briefing you either at the end of this year or early next year on the status of our low-carbon fleet strategy. Good customer information. I think you know that, and sort of to Councilmember Cameron's point a little bit a while ago about how people experience taking public transportation. Accurate information is part of the essential fact. Yeah, it has to be meat and potatoes. It has to be convenient, has to be reliable, has to meet your needs. So that the level and type of service is really important. But also that the information has to be important. This is really one of my favorite projects, Translink. It flies a little bit below the radar screen, but it's a really cool project because it was done in-house. It was done in-house by staff from our IT division and Jeff's group with a little bit of support from Microsoft and a Canadian company called T4G. Where using machine learning, we've dramatically increased the accuracy of our real-time bus predictions. People often think when they're texting to 33333 and they want to find out when their next bus comes, why it's not precise. Well, it really can't be precise based on how the algorithms work, comparing the GPS location of the buses and the schedule system. Using machine learning involving some 18,000 learning models that were ultimately had to be implemented, we've dramatically increased the accuracy of the real-time predictions, as you can see on the screen. The pilot project that we did during the course of the summer involving 13 bus routes proved out these numbers. So what it means is more accurate information, basically a lessened perception of waiting time at your bus. So we're rolling this now out to the entirety of the system. We continue to encourage our customers to use the texting at their bus stop. Text to 33333. Put in your bus stop number and your bus route, and it will tell you the next 2 or 3 buses when they should be arriving. Some 67,000 texts a day on that service, and on the Next Bus web application as well, some 11,700 daily users on average, and all of our third-party applications that go into our pipeline of information also now can benefit from this more accurate information. Lastly, as I think you all know, last week we had Railvolution in town. You can see Mayor Cote helped open the conference up on the Monday morning. We were absolutely delighted to be the first Canadian region in the Railvolution's 25-year history to host the conference. When I helped welcome some guests Sunday night in North Vancouver at the Polygon Gallery, along with Mayors Buchanan and Little and Mayor Cote, I quipped, what took you so long? By all accounts, everything I've heard is that the delegates, some 1,300 people, really had a great time here. This region shows off so very well. I also want to commend Sarah Ross. Sarah worked about 2 years with the organizers of Railvolution to put this project in place here in this region, and she did a masterful job of emceeing the opening event. And in fact, shamelessly, Sarah was selling our swag on stage and from the Translink store. And I understand from our Translink store folks, in less than half a day on that Monday, we sold more T-shirts and umbrellas and water bottles than we did in the entire 2.5 weeks of the P&E. So it was a great event. Thank you, Mayor Cote, to help kick it off. I hope some of you had a chance to go to it, and to Sarah and the fine work she did in helping to organize the conference. That's my report, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Mayor Little?
First of all, thank you very much for the updates, and also I was able to attend the Railvolution opening meeting, and I had chats with people from Dallas, Atlanta, and Minneapolis in that short meeting, and all of them hold Translink in very high regard within the association, which was great to hear. The question that I had for you, you mentioned the capabilities of the app. We're experiencing recurring pass-ups in areas that are either directly feeding Capilano University or common routes to and from the university. Can the app be equipped to warn people when a bus is in pass-up mode so that they can move to an alternate location, try to find a route that may only be a few blocks away, and rather than waiting for the bus to actually show up and be passed by and then try and figure out what to do.
That is technologically feasible. I know that's done in other dimensions. I think the Transit app may do that for some systems that have the technological capability. I have to check that. We don't have the ability at this point to provide that information through the apps. It is, I said, it's technologically possible. We can gather that information whether through our APCs, the automatic passenger counters, or theoretically, I suppose, for the Compass system as well. It's easier said than done, let's put it that way. You've got to then gather a whole different data set and try in real time to understand how many people are on the bus. I don't believe there's any direct information where an operator can push a button now on a bus to say, I'm going to have to start passing up in the next few stops. That could then get into the real-time information. So I guess I could say the good news is the technology probably exists, but we don't have that technology in our systems now. It's worth looking at.
I hope we can move in that direction because you see the frustration, the number of students that are missing classes and having their studies impacted by it is very frustrating. So it'd be great to move in that direction. Thank you.
I would add to that when the questions, when Dan Freeman was up with Jeff talking about Rapid Bus and taking Rapid Bus into something more like BRT, you can also do that with your signal priority system. So you can also get that onboard intelligence where if the signal detects the bus that's coming that's got a certain number of people on the bus, then it can actually preempt the signal to go green to help speed the system along, which can then as well help with crowding in the system and capacity management. So those are some of the other tools where you can use a similar sort of data set to also improve basically the characteristics and the quality of the service. So something worth looking at.
Thank you. Mayor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions around the electric buses. One, is their lifespan any greater than the normal or fueled buses that we use? And two, we're looking at technology and talking about $100,000 for every station to recharge. Are there any buses available on the market that actually run on some kind of a solar panel system that would save us that $100,000 and would be as efficient? And I have one other question after that.
To the second question, I'm not aware of anything like that. I don't know that you could get that kind of charge and get it into a bus. I mean, we can look at that, but I'm not aware of anything like that. To your first question, at this point, the manufacturers would be building, so for example, the two buses that we're operating with Nova and New Flyer are their standard buses. They just now have battery packs. So the life expectancy of the buses, I believe, as we're looking at it, would be the exact same with the existing fleet, whether they're CNG or hybrid. The issue is the life of the battery. And at what point, midlife replacement of the battery and then the cost associated with the battery. That's actually been the primary sort of limiting factor to the technology itself. What we've been looking at as part of our low-carbon fleet strategy, we believe the progress on the energy efficiency and energy storage of batteries continues to progress very favorably, such that at the beginning of next decade, you get a very positive life cycle cost benefit for electric buses. You need a lot of capital up front, but over that 17-year life or so of the bus, even with a midlife battery replacement, you will ultimately save money versus a comparable hybrid bus or CNG bus. Again, that's the information we can bring forward. So even, as taxpayers are listening and hearing this, we believe that at the end of the day, we will be using public dollars even more efficiently by electrifying. We just need that help to get the capital up front to accelerate our adaptation.
Thank you. Another question was around uptake. West Coast Express seemed to be the greatest, 6.1%, I believe, an existing line that we've taken advantage of. If there are other existing lines similar to the West Coast Express, like the interurban, is that something that we're having a look at for moving individuals from farther up the valley, perhaps down to stations within our transit system where we could then get them into the transit system and move them along?
Absolutely. One of the features of the T2050 program that Jeff and Andrew McCurran and their teams are working on is looking at all of the rail infrastructure, rail networks, engaging with the freight movers in the region, whether it's the port or the railroad. So I think that needs to be and will be a major discussion as part of T2050. Now, the challenge, of course, for the main line for the West Coast Express is the freight movers will say that capacity demands are continuing to increase and the near-term projections continuing to increase. So it puts a lot of pressure on the shared use of the right-of-way. In my personal opinion, we need to figure it out with all the partners from the federal government all the way down to the region and the private railroads to figure out how to better manage the capacity so we can effectively move goods and people. That West Coast Express corridor is invaluable to move people, and I'm convinced if we could put more passenger service on West Coast Express corridor, working with the railroads and the freight movers, you would continue to see a very strong demand curve. Much easier said than done, however.
Thank you. Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. I actually want to acknowledge as well Sarah Ross and the team that I was there with some of Translink contingent in Denver at Railvolution 2 years ago, and first of all saw an outstanding conference that really related an awful lot to the work that we have to do in transit-oriented densities around Metro Vancouver. And the decision to try to bring that conference to Coquitlam was to Coquitlam. Well, they visited Coquitlam. To Metro Vancouver was, I think, really important because it brings a whole group of planners in transit and planners in city design to weigh in and to be able to see the work that we're doing here in Metro Vancouver. And if you ever get a chance to go to that conference in another city, take it up because it is a great opportunity to discuss the kinds of things that we all have to weigh in on in our communities related to rail transit. One of the things that I was able to see in Denver and in Portland and various other communities where they may embrace, I'm proud of the way that Translink embraces bikes on transit. As someone with an ambulant disability that uses a bike for the first and last mile quite often, did today in fact, getting it on the reliability of being able to get it on transit. So Mayor Little talks about how do you get the text message to tell you whether the bus is full. Well, I'd actually like to have the text message tell you whether the bus has any room left for bikes, because you can sit there for the 20 minutes and then the bus comes along and both bike spaces are taken up. And similarly on transit, on SkyTrain, that rush hour in the rush hour direction, it becomes a barrier to a lot of people being able to use their bikes and therefore use transit. And a lot of systems have the vertical hooks and things. To what extent are we able to contemplate that for the next generation of SkyTrain? So I've asked you 3 questions.
Was the first question, can we bring Railvolution to Coquitlam?
I forget the first question. The next 2 were more
Maybe
important.
for the 50th anniversary. We'll work on that. The trade-off of bikes on buses or the trade-off of strollers on buses and strollers in SkyTrain, it's a tough trade-off because you're taking up space that otherwise more people can get on. I believe for the next generation of SkyTrain vehicles, we did take a close look at whether and how we could accommodate more bike space, and I actually don't have the update on that. We would get back to you unless somebody in one of the staff knows the answer to that. And on the buses, and we ran in Seattle 3-position bike racks, and we only have the 2-position bike racks here, so that's worth looking at. I don't know if there are safety regulatory issues here that have prevented us from using the 3-position racks. Then finally, in terms of that, the information technology that it would allow to be able to say that all the racks are occupied in the next bus coming goes back to the question, that Mayor Whittle asked, and just the technology associated with that. Something like that doesn't per se exist at this point in time. You'd have to create some kind of intelligence, I presume, on the bus rack or other ways to then feed into a real-time information system. All of that stuff in theory is probably doable, but moving from theory to application is always a challenge. We might put that out for our next open innovation call, however. It's a
There you
good
go.
point.
Well,
Just plugging our Open Innovation Call program.
the Internet of Things is supposed to come along and solve all these
Yeah.
issues, and I think ultimately it will, but they don't get solved if you don't raise them.
Thank you. Mayor Hurley.
Yeah, I was interested, back to electric buses. You said we're buying 6, purchasing 6 perhaps next year.
An additional 6, yes, will be in our procurement that we will then deploy to the Route 100.
So just
Yes.
as a reference point, how many diesel buses are we purchasing next year?
Oh, I don't know offhand. It's in the tens. So we are still buying internal combustion engine vehicles until we have figured out a reasonable plan forward. We need charging infrastructure. That's the key. You have to have the charging infrastructure to make it work. We have to sort out what the right mix of en-route charging versus depot charging. And I can tell you that as we in the industry, certainly in North America, are all kind of struggling on how we move from pilots and small numbers into just full all-in. This debate, if you will, about en-route charging versus depot charging is still kind of a movable debate. We met with 2 different manufacturers very recently here, and I asked them each the question, where do they see the industry going in terms of en-route versus depot? And I was a bit surprised by the answer. And one of the manufacturers actually pioneered en-route charging as a proprietary turnkey. And now they're believing that en-route charging, the orders they see going into the next decade is probably about 90% depot charging, whereas the work we've been doing shows a different kind of distribution. So we want to make sure we get it right. And even as we start our journey to electrify our fleet, that we can be agile enough that as the technology and the learnings from in still these early days from electrification of bus fleets, we can apply that as smartly as possible so we don't make a mistake and we invest in something that maybe is already beyond its time. These are the types of things that we've got to think about in our programming. So we're hopeful that the Route 100 will be fully electrified over the next couple of years. We've got the Silvertree base that will be able to design fully electric. We're looking at how we would retrofit another base, what the costs associated with that retrofit would be, and we are examining the future of the trolley system. If we were to fully electrify the Silvertree base, fully electrify a second base, and then anything that we start buying starting in the 2021 to 23 period are all electric, by the 2030s, 40% of our fleet could be electric. And that's I think that's the conversation we want to have with you as we're starting to talk about phase 3 planning. Those are the conversations we've been initiating with the province as well in trying to find creative ways to capitalize the transition as quickly as possible.
Thank you for that, but the concern for me is that once we buy those diesel buses, we're stuck with them for
That's
17
correct.
years.
Yes, that's correct.
So
That is the dilemma. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Morton.
Thank you. Just piggybacking on the electric conversation here, I'm just wondering how much hydro are we going to be consuming? What do the projections look like per bus? Because running all this charging infrastructure is going to consume a lot of power. And I got a couple of thoughts on that, depending on what that looks like.
Yeah, I would need my expert here to start getting into kilowatts and all that stuff. When we start talking kilowatts, I go back to my public policy stuff. We've been working very, very closely with BC Hydro. Hydro, in fact, is contributing about $500,000 to the project. We've been working with them on the rate scheme as well. We are well within the energy availability throughout the region to fully electrify the system. It may mean, however, where we are installing, whether from a depot charging standpoint or en route chargers, we may have to work with Hydro on substations to up the power. So, for example, I believe the Silvertree site, we are still in discussions with Hydro to make sure there's enough power that can come to the base.
Yeah, so just a couple of thoughts to Mayor Walker's comment on solar. There are good uses for solar. Our rec center was completely refitted with solar, total zero payback, complete payback within 10 years on on that infrastructure, as well as lower costs for hydro consumption within the building. So, and that's coupled into all kinds of things. So that is a secondary way to feed your charging systems and get that benefit. We may not be able to get it right onto the bus, but we may be able to get it another way. Our local fire department is, majority of its building is powered by geothermal. So as you may want to consider that in capital infrastructure when you're building new transit centers, for the ability to be able to service that possibly quite hungry hydro consumption that may be ahead. It seems, I just want to say, it seems kind of ironic. It's kind of like coming back home here as the origins of BC Hydro, and we're going to be big power users. So just throw that out there.
It is, yes. I think back to the future with our bus agencies. Genesis, one could assume 20 or 30 years from now, maybe Hydro will be running the buses anyway.
Okay, well, thanks for all of those comments, and appreciate the management report. I think the slide that really stuck out to me the most, though, is the continued increase with transit ridership. I keep bracing myself for at the point when we won't continue to kind of see these record increases, but every year we get the same report with same very positive transit growth. So
we're fortunate that even as we come and tell you the ridership each time, we're also been adding service. So on September 3rd we added some service on the Expo Millennium line. You heard about the Fraser Highway. The C-Bus went to 10-minute headways as well. So as long as we can continue to prime the pump, at least in some segments of the system, I think we can continue to accommodate more ridership. So we just have to keep doing it.
Okay, excellent. Well, that concludes our meeting. If I can get a motion to adjourn. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Thanks, everyone.
So we're going to stay here for the in-camera meeting. We'll just maybe take 10 minutes for the audience area to clear, and we'll start again at 11:45.